Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you follow my channel, you may recall that I've recently shared with you guys how I took an outdated table and gave it an updated look. I loved how much that table turned out that it inspired me to update the table at home. So today I'll be sharing with you guys this amazing transformation. Back in 2017, my mom and I took this table and stained it in a dark Java color from General Finish. And now, 8 years later, I want to give it a refinish look, refresh it a little bit. Thus, I completely transformed it into a light, natural color, giving it a 180 transformation. As you can see here, the tabletop, the base, and the chairs had your normal wear and tear, a few scratches here and there. The biggest thing was that they were all in this really deep dark color, and I wanted to take it to an extremely light color. And with that, I knew I had a big challenge on my hands. So, nothing else to do but roll up my sleeves and get to work. As I do with all of my projects, I started by disassembling all of the pieces. Typically, I don't disassemble a chair and table completely, but in this case, I decided to go ahead and do it. A couple of reasons. Number one, I'm going from a very dark color to a very light color. I needed to ensure I reached all the connecting corners when sanding the dark color off. Number two, the table base and the back of the chairs had all these rectangular patterns throughout the whole thing. And I was going to have to sand by hand in each section. So I just needed to make sure these were accessible. And number three, I hope that by disassembling it, I would be able to use my sander on more surfaces than if it was assembled. As you guys know, I typically like to save all the loose screws in a Ziploc bag. In this case, I decided to use a bag per chair. There were so many pieces that I didn't want to get them all mixed up in the end when trying to reassemble it. And with everything disassembled, I started off by cleaning everything from old dust, oils, or any food residue with some soap and water. In full transparency, due to the space constraints I had, I did this in phases. I started with the tabletop, then I moved to the base, and finally the chairs. But I followed the exact same steps for each piece. So in this video, instead of going in the chronological order that I did it, I'm going to actually go a step-by-step process for all of the pieces at the same time. So to remove the old stain, I started off by applying a layer of paint remover and stripper. Whenever I'm using these chemicals, I take a handful of precautions for safety reasons. I ensure I'm in a well-ventilated area to avoid any chemical intoxication. I also use gloves to avoid any chemical burns on my hands. Then, with a brush, I simply apply a generous layer of paint to the furniture, allowing it to sit for about 5 to 10 minutes for the chemical reaction to take place. Once the stain or paint, whichever one you're dealing with, starts to bubble up, it's time to remove it. With a flex scraper, I start to remove the old stain. It is important to note that you want to try and scrape along the wood grain. And you don't want to scrape too hard because you'll end up scratching the surface of your furniture. It's better to add a couple of layers of the paint remover and stripper versus harming the surface. This is what the table looked like after the first layer, so I went ahead and I added a second layer of the chemical, following the exact same process. Here's another thing I've learned by trial and error. You do not want this to dry off. You want this to have kind of a wet consistency when taking it off. If for some reason you have an area that has dried off, just apply some more stripper, and then that's going to help reactivate the chemical and allow for the best results. Another thing I like to do that avoids it from drying off is applying a clear wrap on top of it. This will allow the chemical reaction to take place without drying off. This particular day, it was about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, so I did not necessarily apply a clear wrap. I typically do this when it's hot outside. This can be extremely messy and annoying to clean, so I do a few things to prep my work area. I put a cardboard box on the bottom, that way when I'm done, I can simply throw it away. I also use a cardboard box to dispose of the waste. I've used plastic before, but this chemical will burn through it and it kind of null and voids the whole easy cleanup area. So I've learned cardboard is the way to go. Using mineral spirits, some steel wool, and a rag, I remove the paint remover and stripper from the furniture. And as per usual, I ensure to wear gloves to protect my hands from any chemical burn. I use the steel wool to lightly scrub and remove any remainder stain that's on the furniture. Then I wipe everything down with the rag. A quick tip. I like to use old socks that have holes on them or that I lost one of them as my rag. They're great to just slip onto your hands and scrub away without worrying to hold on tight. So don't throw away those old socks and just use them for your projects. I allowed this to completely dry for about an hour. Then, with a 120 grit sandpaper, I started sanding down the table. Remember, I am trying to take this from a really dark chocolate Java color to a more light, neutral, breezy color. So I needed to find a way to get rid of this dark reddish stain. For the lateral part of the table, I had to sand this by hand because this was actually not wood nor veneer, it was a plastic. I had never seen something like this before, and I was terrified that I was going to ruin this by over sanding or scratching it or just simply breaking it. However, I knew that I needed to remove this dark stain. So slowly but surely, the old stain was coming off. For everything else, it was made out of wood. So I went to town and I started sanding away. Unfortunately, the sander was unable to reach these inside rectangular details, so I had to sand these by hand. Yes, by hand. It took what felt like an eternity, but in all reality, it took me about 4 days to sand down the table, the base, and the chairs. So it wasn't that bad. And with everything stripped down from its original stain to a natural wood, it was time to clean off the dust and assess the condition of the table. As you guys can see, as I'm wiping this down, there are some spotty areas in the wood. Some areas that look a little bit darker than the others, some that had a little bit of a red undertone. And this was definitely not the look I was going for. So I knew I needed to add some type of stain or wash or something. And in order to achieve the most coherent look throughout the entire thing, with all the different wood materials this table was made out of, I applied a layer of pre-stain wood conditioner to everything. This will act similar to a primer. It will help even out the amount of stain that is absorbed in the wood, giving the piece a sense of uniformity. It also helps prevent any streaks or blotches that can be throughout the wood. For this piece, I decided to make a light brown wash or a tan wash with colors I had on hand, a bone white and a truffle brown. To ensure I kept the wash consistent, I added a guide with blue painter's tape, labeling how much of the bone white paint I wanted to water ratio. Then I simply added a tablespoon of the truffle brown and mixed it real well until it was fully blended. To apply the wash, I simply added a layer of wash with a brush and removed any excess with a clean paper towel. The challenge when applying any type of stain or wash is that you want to go with the grain of the wood. In this case, the tabletop had a veneer that was going in all sorts of directions, which made it a little bit more challenging, but in the end, I was able to make it work. And after a day's worth of applying the wash, everything was ready to be sealed. I didn't want this table to be matte, but I also didn't want it to be shiny. So I did something I've never done before. To seal the piece, I combined varathane polyurethane in a matte finish with polyurethane in a satin finish in 2 equal parts. When it came to applying the sealer, I decided to use a foam roller for the tabletop for the smoothest finish I could. I applied 3 layers of polyurethane, lightly sanding in between each layer with a 320 grit sandpaper and wiping off any excess dust. Here's another tip. When working with polyurethane, you always want to have a quote-unquote wet edge to avoid any streaks or rough finishes. So when working with a rectangular table or dresser, this is much easier to accomplish versus a round table. In order to achieve this wet edge, I applied polyurethane in small sections, moving back and forward from side to side until the table was fully sealed. When it came to the base of the table and the chairs, since they had so many nicks and crannies, instead of using a foam roller, I decided to use a paint gun. This will allow the polyurethane to reach those hard to reach areas and avoid any excess sealer dripping on the sides. To ensure the best spray possible, I went ahead and I strained the polyurethane, I added some water, and similar to the tabletop, I applied 3 layers of polyurethane, lightly sanding and cleaning in between each layer. Using a small flathead, a staple remover, and some pliers, I started removing all the old staples that were holding this into place. Now, it was time to reupholster. I simply cut the fabric in squares that were the size that I needed, set the fabric upside down on a clean surface, and then placed the seat upside down as well and began stapling it into place. I like to start off by placing one staple on each edge, ensuring that the fabric is nice and tight. Then I staple the corners into place, and I start tightening the rest of the fabric around the chair cushion, ensuring there are no creases on the side. Once all the fabric was in place, I cut off any excess fabric, and finally, I added the bottom cloth to the base. And voila, we were done. 1 down, 3 to go. Whenever I'm reupholstering with a light color fabric, similar to this one, I always like to add a fabric protector. This will provide an extra layer of protection against spills and stains. And with that, it was time to add the final touches and reset into place for final pictures. Okay, here's a quick reminder of what we started with. A table with a really dark Java chocolatey color that just needed to be brightened up and brought into a more modern, light natural wood color. And we ended up with this beautiful, breezy, natural, light looking colored table. I'm obsessed. This turned out amazing. The long hours, the patience it took to remove that old dark stain from each rectangular area, it was all well worth it. Now, I'm going to be super honest with you guys. If I was selling this table, I don't think I would have put so much effort and love into this look. So if you guys are curious on what table inspired me to refinish this one, and you haven't seen that transformation, I'll make sure to add a link in the video in the description below. And if you guys don't follow my channel, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button in the bottom left-hand corner. That way you don't miss out on any updates. If you're curious on the materials I use for this project, as usual, I'll make sure to leave a list and links in the description below. But for now, I am going to have to say goodbye. And I'm going to see you guys next time here at Angie's Crafts Furniture Renovation. Goodbye!